The letter in the margins. The evening sun painted long shadows across the porch of the old colonial house as Marcus Henderson stood perfectly still, a cream-colored envelope trembling in his hands. 6 months had passed since he'd lost Elena, his wife of 12 years, and the grief still felt as fresh as morning dew. He had been sorting through her belongings that afternoon, a task he'd been avoiding for weeks. Elena's library had always been her sanctuary, floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with worn paperbacks and leather-bound classics. She would spend hours there, curled up in her favorite armchair by the window, lost in other worlds while Marcus worked late at his company downtown. The letter had fallen from between the pages of an old copy of Little Women, one of Elena's most treasured books. The envelope was addressed simply, "To whoever finds this." Marcus had opened it with shaking hands, expecting perhaps a note to him, some final words of love and comfort. Instead, he found an address. Below the address, written in Elena's elegant handwriting, were just 7 words: "Please make sure she is all right." No name, no explanation, just an address in the older part of town, where the houses leaned slightly with age and the sidewalks cracked like dried riverbeds. Marcus had spent the rest of the afternoon staring at that note, turning it over in his mind. Elena had always been private about her charitable work, often disappearing on Saturday mornings with bags of groceries or clothing. When he asked, she would simply smile and say she was visiting a friend. He had never pressed her for details. Their life had been comfortable, perhaps too comfortable, and he had been content to let her have her secrets. But now, standing on this weathered porch as twilight approached, Marcus realized how little he had truly known about the woman he loved. The house before him was small and tired, its white paint peeling like old skin. A child's bicycle lay on its side in the patchy front yard, and a wind chime made from seashells tinkled softly in the breeze. Marcus had driven here directly from his own home in the suburbs, still wearing his suit from the office, feeling increasingly out of place with each passing mile. He raised his hand and knocked gently on the door. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then he heard footsteps, light and hesitant, followed by the sound of a chain being drawn back. The door opened a crack, and a young woman peered out at him with cautious blue eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft but wary. Marcus cleared his throat. "I'm sorry to disturb you. My name is Marcus Henderson. I found this address in a letter from my late wife, Elena. I believe she may have known you." The change in the woman's expression was immediate and profound. Her hand flew to her mouth, and tears sprang to her eyes. She opened the door wider, revealing a small child clinging to her leg, a little girl with golden curls and the same blue eyes as her mother. "Elena," the woman whispered. "Oh God, is she really gone?" Marcus nodded, his own throat tight with emotion. 6 months ago, cancer. She never told me she was as sick as she was until it was too late." The woman covered her face with both hands for a moment, her shoulders shaking. Then she seemed to collect herself and stepped back from the doorway. "Please, come in. I'm sorry. I'm Sarah Mitchell." The interior of the house was neat but sparse. A worn sofa sat against one wall, its cushions carefully patched. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator in the tiny kitchen visible beyond. Everything spoke of dignity maintained despite difficult circumstances. Sarah gestured for Marcus to sit, then settled onto the edge of the sofa with her daughter in her lap. The little girl stared at Marcus with solemn curiosity. "This is Lily," Sarah said, smoothing the child's hair. "She just turned 4. Elena was," her voice broke slightly. "Elena was the only reason we survived this past year." Marcus leaned forward, listening intently as Sarah's story unfolded. They had met at a free clinic where Sarah had taken Lily for a persistent cough. Elena had been there volunteering, and somehow, Sarah couldn't quite explain how, they had ended up talking for hours. Sarah had been recently divorced, working 2 part-time jobs to keep a roof over their heads, struggling with medical bills from Lily's chronic asthma. Elena had started showing up with groceries every week. Then she'd helped Sarah find a better job with benefits. She'd paid for Lily's medications when the prescriptions were too expensive. But more than the financial help, Sarah said, Elena had been a friend, perhaps the only real friend Sarah had in the city. "She never made me feel like charity," Sarah said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "She'd sit right here on this couch and drink tea and tell me about her life. About you, actually. She loved you very much, Mr. Henderson." Marcus felt something crack open inside his chest. "She never told me about you," he said quietly. "Why would she keep this from me?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering. I think maybe she wanted to keep one thing that was just hers. Does that sound terrible? She said you gave her everything, a beautiful home, security, love. But this, helping people like me, this was something she chose for herself. As the evening deepened into night, Marcus stayed. He listened to more stories about Elena, a version of his wife he had never fully seen. He learned that she had been helping not just Sarah, but several other families in the neighborhood. That she had organized a small food pantry out of a local church basement. That she had been planning to expand her efforts before she got sick. Finally, as Marcus rose to leave, Sarah caught his hand. Mr. Henderson, Marcus, I don't know why Elena left you that letter, but I want you to know we're managing. You don't need to feel obligated. What if I want to be obligated? Marcus interrupted gently. He looked down at little Lily, who had fallen asleep on the couch, her small chest rising and falling peacefully. What if I want to continue what Elena started? Over the following months, Marcus became a regular visitor to Sarah's house. He established a trust fund for Lily's education and medical expenses. But more importantly, he listened as Sarah told him about the other families Elena had been helping, and together they began to build something larger. The Henderson Foundation opened its doors a year after Elena's death, operating out of a renovated building in Sarah's neighborhood. Marcus had Sarah managing it, overseeing programs for single parents, medical assistance, and educational support. One Saturday morning, as Marcus helped organize donated clothing in the foundation's warehouse, Sarah approached him with a thoughtful expression. You know, she said, I think I finally understand why Elena left you that letter. She wanted you to find this, all of this. Not just me, but this purpose. This way of being in the world. Marcus paused, a child's winter coat in his hands, and looked around at the busy warehouse, volunteers sorting donations, families selecting what they needed with dignity and gratitude. Through the window, he could see the neighborhood that had become as familiar to him as his own. She knew me better than I knew myself, he said softly. She knew I was lost in work, in success, in all the things that don't really matter. She left me a map to find my way back to what does. That evening, Marcus returned to Elena's library. He pulled down Little Women, and opened it to the page where he'd found the letter. In the margin, in Elena's handwriting, was a passage she had underlined years ago. Love is the only thing that we can carry with us when we go, and it makes the end so easy. Marcus closed the book gently and smiled. Elena had carried her love forward, and now, through Sarah, through Lily, through all the families they were helping, that love continued to ripple outward like light through water. The letter had led him to Sarah, but it had really led him back to Elena, to the best parts of her, and through her, to the best parts of himself.